10 reasons why you may regret moving to Australia. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 reasons why you may regret moving to Australia. And wait till you see the number one reason that we're going to be showing in this video. Something you would never even have thought of, so make sure you watch till the end. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Trip Xtreme, for more awesome top 10s, and make sure to hit the notification bell so that you know when we publish a new video. So bonza mate, let's cut to the chase. At number 10, the weather can be really quite upsetting. Australia is a land of extremes. In some parts of the country, the seasons can be described as hot, really hot, bloody boiling, really hot. The summer of 2017, for example, was one of the worst I have ever experienced. Extreme humidity, with the temperatures going over 40 degrees Celsius every third day or so. My bedroom had no air conditioning, which made the nights really fun. Yet it does get properly cold in the winter, especially down south, and particularly in Tasmania, where the climate is more European, or more like New Zealand's. In the northern parts of the country, they have just two seasons, the wet and the dry. The dry is during wintertime, when the temperatures are manageable, think mid-late 20s, early 30s. Australia too is a country liable for natural disasters. Cyclones, floods, bushfires, drought, all things that Australians have to contend with. These events are scary. They kill people. With a changing climate, it's a bit worrisome to think about the future where extreme weather events are concerned. I do not hate Australia or living in Australia. I also don't really need any aspect of why Australia is the way it is man-explained to me. I've lived here for most of my life. I'm fluent in how this country functions. There are certain elements of living here that aren't great. However, you could say that about any country of the world. Australia is not the best damn country in the world, as some may claim, because nowhere is perfect. After living away from the country for a spell of time, or coming to live here in the first place, you may regret moving to Australia. I personally think life down under is pretty good, most of the time. However, I do think there are things about Australia that could be improved. These are some aspects of life in Australia that those living here have to deal with. You may not necessarily regret moving to Australia, but you should know what you're signing up for well in advance. At number 9, the internet is pretty awful. There was once this dream of having fibre optic internet in Australia. It was an ambitious idea, as Australia is one of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. In terms of population density, there are around 3 people to every square kilometre. This dream tanked when the Conservative federal government instead chose to save on costs by continuing using decades-old copper phone lines for internet connection, having chosen a fibre-to-the-node strategy. This was due to be completed in 2016. It's 2021 as I write this. I live in the second largest city in the country, and I don't yet have access to the national broadband network. Fun times. The most irritating thing is, eventually we will have to catch up to everyone else and replace the links with fibre optics, taking the investment way beyond its initial calculated price of 45.6 billion Australian dollars. We're currently ranked 62nd for internet speed in the world, which is pretty abysmal for a country with an economy as advanced as our own. The not very funny punchline of this joke: we invented Wi-Fi. At least Australia's mobile internet speeds are at 5th globally. Port off your phone, perhaps? Next up at number 8, it's isolated, both geographically and metaphorically. Australia is a very self-contained place. This makes sense when you think about how isolated we are geographically, hanging out on the bottom of the globe, taking hours to get across the country, let alone leave its shores. This sense of isolation is perpetuated by our media. Commercial networks don't give nearly as much airtime to world events, depending on where in the world it's taking place, tending to report mostly on what's happening within the country's borders. It's nice in some ways, as you can feel quite safe living here, which is something that should not be taken for granted. On the other, we should care about what's happening in the world quite simply because we are actually part of it. Number 7, travelling abroad is an expensive and time-consuming endeavour. I didn't step foot outside Australia until I was 20 years old, and I'm not alone in this. Most of my friends were in the same boat unless they went on exchange, saved up to travel during university breaks, went to Bali for their end-of-school celebrations, or had their families take them abroad on holiday. And those who did go overseas mostly had just travelled to cheap destinations in Asia or New Zealand. European friends, on the other hand, who flit through countries and languages on the regular, are surprised by this. But whilst you can travel from, say, London to Rome for £9 return trip, you're not going to see the same for Sydney to Bangkok. Plus, an 8-hour flight to a destination from Australia is considered to be on the short side. Unlike Europe, it's not like you can jet off to Singapore for the weekend. Well, you could, but it would be a waste of time and money. Next up at number 6, travelling within the country is also quite expensive. So why not stick to travelling within the country then? This is what many Australians tend to do, however the price of doing so can be alarming. In the 90s, Australia was considered a budget destination for backpackers, and people who are my age now, in their 30s, could actually afford housing in the city. Times have changed, and travel within the country is now as or more expensive than travel overseas. I've seen flights to Auckland from Sydney that have been cheaper than flights to Perth. Truth. Moving on to number 5, our public transport infrastructure badly needs work. Another oft-discussed government dream is the placement of a high-speed train up Australia's east coast, linking Melbourne to Brisbane, with Sydney and Canberra in between, much like the Shinkansen in Japan. A high-speed rail could be a wonderful solution, enabling population to spread out beyond the big cities, revitalising communities up and down the coast. For now, it's a very expensive pipe dream that doesn't look to happen within this generation. In the bigger cities, governments are throwing money at large-scale infrastructure programs, but they're throwing it at our roads rather than public transport. Take the Westconnex in Sydney, an ambitious 8-kilometre-long tunnel that's causing one headache after another. Yeah, there's the light rail as well, but that's had its issues too. Melbourne too has invested billions in recent road transport projects. The city still has no train line out at the airport, scheduled to change in time, but come on. Australia is one of the most car-reliant nations in the world, and it seems like nothing will be done to combat this anytime soon. Number 4, the cost of living has risen considerably. Australia's booming economy has had its drawbacks, with the cost of living rising considerably over the last couple of decades. The median house price in Sydney has been $1 million Australian dollars for years, finally dipping this year. Young adults find themselves having to live at home well beyond the length of time that both they and their parents find tolerable in order to survive. There's a very real chance we are heading into recession, which we were lucky enough to avoid during the global financial crisis of 2008. There are interesting and unnerving times ahead for sure, enough to perhaps make you regret moving to Australia. And now, number 3, racism. Well, it's here, but then it's everywhere. Hello to the elephant in the room. Is Australia racist? It's a bit of a tough question to answer. I would say yes, there are racist people in Australia, yet there are also many people living here who are friendly and inclusive. It's not really fair to paint an entire country with one brush, especially when many other countries are also prone to similar crappy behaviour. I can only really use my own experience as an example. I'm a dinky-die Aussie born and bred, going back generations on my dad's side. I'm 100% fluent in Strine, and I'm sitting here typing this out in my tracky dacks and Ugg boots. I'm also not white. My skin is a lovely honey brown colour. My ethnic background? Why, it's none of your business, so don't even ask. But I do regularly get asked where I come from, and sometimes get told to go back to wherever that is. Like I said, I was born here, so confusing much? There are racist people in Australia, sure. They're everywhere and probably enjoying their time in the light at the moment. I think a lot of it has to do with the aforementioned isolation, a fear of the unknown and rapid change. Australia has changed a lot recently. The world has, really. But just a tip in general, if you start a sentence with, "I'm not a racist, but," you've probably already lost the argument. Number 2. Australian politics kinda suck. If you're even slightly into politics, you'll either find Australian politics the most interesting thing ever, or a cause to cry into your pillow every night. 12 years ago, with the election of Kevin Rudd and his Labour government, it certainly felt like good things ahead. We survived the global financial crisis. We were going to get super fast internet. We were enjoying an age of affluence. Life in Australia was pretty sweet. Then things fell apart. Rudd's popularity drastically fell and he was replaced by our first female Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. Say what you want about Gillard, without resorting to misogyny, thanks, but she pushed through more legislation than any other PM in Australian history. From 2013, the opposition coalition government played musical chairs with the Prime Minister's seat, giving us 3 more PMs in 5 years. They shockingly won the most recent election despite having a pretty piss-weak climate action plan, wasting money on a plebiscite to legalise same-sex marriage, committing constant human rights violations in offshore detention centres, and approving a coal mine in Queensland that would cause severe damage to the local biodiversity and harm the already endangered Great Barrier Reef. I could go on, but it wouldn't be good for my blood pressure levels. Oh, but they pulled the budget back into surplus apparently. Yep, that would be great if we were talking about running a business, not a country. In general, we seem to be moving backwards as a country rather than forwards. Ironic when you consider our national emblem, which features an emu and kangaroo on it, animals chosen for their inability to walk backwards. And finally, at number 1, the treatment of the First Nations population could be a lot better. It is or should be well-known knowledge that the treatment of the Indigenous population by the British was horrendous. Families were ripped apart through attempts of assimilation, which led to the stolen generations, where children were forcibly taken from their families, some never to see each other again. Culture was decimated. There were massacres of First Peoples and the spread of European disease within communities. It's awful history. Much of this is living memory, with many Aboriginal Australians living today still having memories of life on missions operating as recently as the late 60s. Today, there are many misconceptions about life as an Aboriginal person in Australia. Some mistakenly believe that the First Nations peoples received government handouts. Sorry, not true. In fact, the federal government spends more money per head on non-Aboriginal people. There are many Australians who identify as being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. However, asking them how Aboriginal they are or why they don't look Aboriginal is sadly common but extremely offensive. If someone says they are First Nations people, then they are. End of story. And for Australians of other backgrounds, interaction with Aboriginal cultures can be limited, which is sad. They're fascinating and ancient cultures that should be preserved and cherished. And there you have the top 10 reasons why you may regret moving to Australia. Did you like what you saw? Let us know in the comments down below. Share this video with your friends and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Trip Xtreme for more fantastic top 10 lists. See you next time.